Welcome to the Great Basin Spring and Fire Potential Outlook for March through June. This is Gina McGuire. Over the next several minutes, we'll talk about recent weather across the Great Basin, the current status and expectations of El Nino, and the March through June weather and fire potential forecast. Over the last 30 days, we've generally seen below normal temperatures, the image on the left, over much of the eastern half of Nevada into Utah and into parts of southern Idaho, with near or just above normal temperatures elsewhere. Also, drier weather emerged in February. However, we did have some precipitation. However, most areas across Nevada and southern Utah were near normal with respect to precipitation over the last month, with drier conditions over southern Nevada, still northern Utah, the eastern side of Idaho, and into western Wyoming. However, looking back to the beginning of the water year, October 1st, 2015, and much of the Great Basin is still seeing well above normal precipitation overall, with the exception of parts of Wyoming, the northern half of Utah, and into far southern Nevada and the Arizona Strip. Looking at the snowpack, as of 1 month ago, the early part of February, we saw well above normal snowpack over much of Nevada, the Sierra, and into the southern half of Utah, with near normal conditions further north and east. However, with drier conditions emerging throughout February, the snowpack has depleted. Also, we've seen warmer temperatures in some areas. However, still the snowpack is near normal in most areas. If we look at the difference in February this year to February last year, and you can see a more significant difference with the very dry winter we saw in 2014 to 2015, the snowpack was well below normal. So again, we're at least faring much better than where we were this time last year, and wetter conditions will continue throughout the month of March. Looking at the drought monitor, the image on the left shows the current drought monitor. We're still seeing extreme to exceptional drought over the western half of Nevada and into the Sierra. However, this area of extreme to exceptional drought has diminished somewhat over the last several months due to the wetter conditions. As you move further east, the drought has improved more significantly, especially over the eastern and southern half of Utah and into eastern Nevada, where we're seeing abnormally dry conditions. Looking at the image on the right, you'll see the drought outlook through the end of May, and you will notice that the drought will likely persist over areas over northwest Nevada into Idaho, where drier conditions will likely develop later in the spring. However, we'll likely see drought improving gradually over the western side of Nevada and over much of the Great Basin. Now we will look at the current status of El Nino, and this we will look at sea surface temperatures across the equatorial Pacific. The image on the left is showing current sea surface temperatures, and you can see throughout the animation over the last couple of months, these warmer temperatures, the bright reds and oranges over the equatorial Pacific off the South American coast, have since cooled slightly. Also, looking at the anomalies, which is the image on the right, this shows how far these temperatures are above or below normal. And again, you can see the bright oranges and reds showing the well above normal temperatures we saw earlier in the winter have now diminished and have cooled somewhat, so we're generally still seeing above normal temperatures, so we still are in a state of El Nino. However, again, these temperatures have gradually been cooling. Despite the cooling temperatures across the equatorial Pacific, we are still in a state of El Nino. However, we have reached the peak of El Nino over the last month or month and a half, and we have gradually been decreasing with sea surface temperatures or seeing a gradually weaker El Nino over the last month, and that will continue as we move through the spring. However, despite the weakening phase of El Nino, we'll continue to see the effects on the weather pattern throughout at least the spring, if not into the early summer. What this typically means, if you look at the image on the bottom, is a wetter pattern, especially across the southern tier of the country, which usually encompasses the southern half of the Great Basin, with drier and warmer weather further north. We'll likely see this pattern emerge as we move later in the spring. So now looking at the expectations for the next few months with regard to temperature and precipitation. For the Great Basin, this middle row, which shows the areas shaded in red and blue, indicate the expectations for temperature. We will likely see cooling across the Great Basin over the next couple of months as we see this wetter pattern emerge once again. However, as we move into June and later in the summer, we'll likely see possibly cooler conditions further east, but we may see some warming over the western half of the Great Basin. Looking at precipitation, which is this bottom row, again, we'll likely see very wet conditions throughout the month of March. In fact, March, over the next 4-month period, will likely be our wettest month. As we move through April and May, we'll continue to see these wetter conditions across especially the western half of the Great Basin, and as we move into May and June, this wetter pattern may start shifting further east with drier weather, again with possibly warmer temperatures emerging over the southern and western half of the Great Basin. This will be critical in determining when fire season starts across the Great Basin and what areas dry out first. Looking at the overall outlook for the next several months, We're looking at normal fire potential in most areas. However, as we get into the month of June especially, if we do see this drying and warming pattern emerge, we may start to see some above normal fire potential over parts of southern and western areas of the Great Basin. However, this is still fairly low confidence at this time. However, due to the wet conditions we've seen and what we will likely continue to see, we'll be looking at where the areas of significant fuel growth, especially fine fuels, are for this fire season. In summary, drought conditions still persist across much of the Great Basin, especially the western half, but will gradually be improving over the next 6 months. Fuels are still in dormancy, but will be starting green up later in the spring, especially with all the wetter conditions we'll be expecting throughout the month of March. Although the strong El Nino will continue to weaken, we'll continue to see these effects on the weather pattern, with drier and warmer areas potentially in the north and wetter and cooler areas in the south and east. We don't have any major fire concerns over the next couple of months, with this wetter pattern likely to continue. However, as we move into May and June and we do see some drier periods emerging, we may see some brief increases in fire potential with windy conditions. However, as we get into later in the month of June, that's when fire season will really start to take shape. And the precipitation through this period, through the next month or two especially, will play a significant role both in where the significant fuel growth will occur and also when our fire season will start and where the most significant fire potential will occur this season. That concludes our briefing for today. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you for listening.